Welcome everyone, here in person and online. Um, so this is the session on advancing Earth system science by innovating distributed streaming data access and data-proximate computation. I know that's a mouthful. I promise you that by the end of the session, you'll have some idea of what all that means. So we're not going to talk about this in a general sense. We'll use the particular example of the Open Science Data Federation, which is an NSF-funded infrastructure to that can be leveraged to share your data. And we'll also talk about the Open Science Pool. Our first speaker will give you more details about that. But just to orient yourself, if you're a data provider, then you can hope to learn how to plug into this national, even international scale data distribution infrastructure and share your data. And if you're a user of this data, a scientist, you can learn how to plug into the system and get the data that you want. And if you want to scale up your computational workflows, then you can learn, hopefully get an introduction to the open science pool and learn how it can explode the boundaries of your research. With that, I'm Harsham Papura from NCAR. Sorry, I should have done that first. And I'll introduce my co-organizer, Doug Schuster, also from NCAR. It's, yeah, please feel comfortable and check into the Google Doc. And I think that's okay. All right. So we'll get started with our first speaker, Brian Bogelman. Brian.
So I have one animation, which we'll see if it makes the translation to Google Docs or if it'll be really funny. With apologies to Harsha for changing the title of my talk, I find I don't know what the title of my talk is until I sit down and actually think through my slides. But I want to talk about two pieces of infrastructure, but at some extent, never trust the snake oil salesman. So before we talk about the solution, I want to talk about what we're thinking of. And basically, we want to be in the business of helping researchers do more. And that's what our services, that's what our infrastructure is all about, trying to provide more data capabilities, more computing infrastructure open to US researchers. So the two things I'll talk about in the next 9 minutes are NSF funded. They're open to all open science researchers. I try to draw that boundary as widely as possible. So hopefully everybody in the room actually would be able to benefit from either of these. They don't require any allocation or scientific proposal. The assumption that is, if you got the funding, if you're there, if you're doing the science, somebody else evaluated us. It's not our business to do that. And what's really important for me is none of this is pay per use. We find that if you give out allocations of this many compute hours or charge this many cents per gigabyte or any of these sorts of things, you put researchers into the mindset of scarcity, that you make people think, I don't want to try this idea because it's too risky. I don't want to blow my allocation. I don't want to get my grad student thinking big things because my other grad student is closer to graduation and they might run out the allocation. So we are in the business and trying to get people to think big in what they do. The way we approach things, the background. So I'm help run the Center for High Throughput Computing. So we're all about high throughput. And my professional trainings as a computer scientist, so I can't help but myself but include a car analogy. So if you want to draw things by analogies, when we do high throughput, I want to be the dump truck. I could care less about the Lamborghini. I don't care how fast it takes to do one simulation. I want to know, can I enable somebody to do 1 million simulations? And the same way that if you have a grocery list of 10 items on it, you might use pencil and paper to track it. But if you have a grocery list of 10 million items, you might use other tools. a lot of what we do is provide services and technologies to help manage really large ensembles of jobs. So we love people that say, hey, I could do better science if I could run more simulations. I could do better science if I could analyze more data sets and more images. We don't tend to specialize in the I've got 16,000 A100s on an InfiniBand backend, and I want to do a climate simulation as fast as possible. That's wonderful science as well, but just not our bailiwick. So the two services we run are the OS pool and the OSDF. The OS pool aggregates resources from about 80-ish institutions, depends a little bit on the day, takes them, pastes them together into a single nationwide Condor pool. So the experience is, you kind of SSH into what we call an access point. You place your workload. It eventually gets down to a bunch of batch jobs. We love people who come up and say, can I put 10 million jobs in the queue? Those people are wonderful. And it distributes that out across the US as if it was one big cluster co-located. The second service that we run is the OSDF, and that tries to tackle the data problem. How do you actually get the bytes to feed the computation? And since it's a relatively technical group, the analogy I use is we want to build a Cloudflare for science. We want to make sure that anybody can connect their data set repository into the infrastructure. They don't need to scale their data set repository, but the hope is that the infrastructure will do the scaling, do the circuit breakers, do the rate management so that the repository doesn't have to invest in lots of expensive hardware, but we can use this common fabric across the US. I love maps. So we have a small cottage industry of putting maps of all the people we work with. So on the left here, this is institutions contributing to the OS pool. It's a fun, interesting fact of US history that you get this line right down the Missouri River. If you ever look at all the R1 institutions in the US, it's about this picture as well. It's pretty cool. Um, and then for the OSDF, a lot of the infrastructure is not necessarily at each institution contributing computing, but wherever the data lives. And then we also try to make sure that we have services running close by all the other places within the US. So if you would have zoomed into this US map, we have a cache or staging service within 500 miles of basically anywhere in the US. A lot of these are at the major R&E networks, so we can effectively distribute out. To give a sense of scale, on any given day, we're running about a million jobs, 12 million file transfers to support those jobs. It's on the compute side. On the OSDF side, we move about 145 petabytes a year. Really busy days, we'll be doing about a petabyte a day. I zoom in on one of the particular caches, and you can see that individual services at one data center can start to hit close to 100 gigabits a second. I hate acronyms. I much rather work with software that's named after birds. So in case if you've heard some of this, the compute infrastructure is powered by a piece of software called Condor. It is older than some of the people in the room, at least. It's actually been in continuous development. We had a birthday cake for it this year, 40 years. For the OSDF, even though the service has been around there longer, we're in the middle of re-architecting it as part of the Pelican project. We're about 2 years into a 4-year grant supporting the underlying software. I put this slide in mostly for a little bit background or in terms of who we work with, what we do. But I think the most important part is to know that we try to provide this caching layer. Here I focus in the picture across the US, but as we grow colleagues in Europe, we now have significant presence in Europe, starting to build out to South America and some in Asia as well. So to kind of give a hint of the different things that are connected, on one hand, we have NCAR's Research Data Archive is available completely through the OSDF. You might have seen about 2 months ago, the URLs started to change to actually point at the OSDF whenever you click and download data sets. But in terms of the data layer for this infrastructure, it could do all sorts of that sub-object byte range caching, things like this. So it's actually meant for effective scaling out of objects. Additionally, we're connected to AWS Open Data. And so some of the really cool demos I like, which we'll see how badly Google has mauled my next slide with an animation on it, can even bring in both in-car-based data and AWS-based data within one infrastructure. Oh, I guess my animation is one more slide. Even though I started the sales pitch as high throughput computing and let's think big, turns out it works well for other cases. You can, as in-car's done, just do it for browser-based downloads and for people clicking. But we also love Jupyter Hub and visualization. And I think some of Harsh has some great demos along those lines. Maybe this works. Looking at the time, I think I'm going to skip the animation. The important part is that we have the object store, say AWS S3 or the file system at NCAR, and we put the infrastructure in the middle to allow us to, oh yeah, this got mistranslated. That's all right. And the data gets pulled in and stays within the RNE network. So the goal is there's no egress costs. We avoid having to charge or try to make scarce the data. Other services that'll get covered hopefully a little bit today. Claire will be talking about the National Data Platform. But I also wanted to mention that these are built on largely distributed Kubernetes infrastructure called the National Research Platform, headquartered out of San Diego, operated at University of Nebraska. And the lower level Kubernetes, again, open to anybody who's a US-based researcher, is wonderful for bespoke services, they have teachers launching Jupyter hubs for the duration of class. And it's great if you kind of have that level of expertise and want to just launch a service or provide some one-offs and not necessarily do the scale computing. So why did I show up today? A couple goals that I want to plant seeds here. I want to highlight a couple of different individuals who built out and used these services for some wonderful science. Yes, I am here as a snake oil salesman. I can't help myself, so I do want to do some proselytizing. But also, honestly, I'm interested in what other data set repositories we could connect. What are use cases? Who could this benefit, and how could we work together? And we not only produce beautiful maps and lots of statistics, but we love to interact with humans. Unfortunately, our big summer events are already all in the past, but if anybody's interested in learning more, we do have a annual summer school and get together to talk about these technologies and approaches. Thanks.
Yeah, we can take one question for Brian.
We can also take
we have a good discussion at the end, and I think some of this is lead in for the next set of speakers.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, Harsha, so you're up
Yeah.
next.
All right. So I'm here today to talk about the integration of NCAR's data infrastructure with the OSDF, and Brian already covered a lot of it. So this is the story of how we plugged into the OSDF ecosystem and increased the reach of our data. And if you're a scientist, there are a bunch of workflows that leverage this infrastructure. So wait for that too. So in the next 10 minutes or so, but hopefully under 10 minutes, I'll talk about the National Discovery Cloud, which is the NSF-funded initiative under whose umbrella we are collaborating. And I'll talk about NCAR's data infrastructure, which we have dubbed the Data Commons. And as I promised, I'll get to some workflows. So NDC, National Discovery Cloud, is a pilot program funded by NSF to set up a national scale data infrastructure that can help Earth system science researchers. So these are our broad goals. We want to broaden community access to NCAR's data, and this includes a host of data sets, including model output, observations, to support extreme weather research and climate research in particular. A secondary goal is to train researchers on how their research workflows can leverage the capabilities of the NDC, in particular to run computational workflows that ingest data using this infrastructure. And as Brian briefly showed you an example, this involves accessing data from multiple data origins. Okay, a lightning review of NCAR's data first, because not everybody is familiar with it. So we are a huge organization with 8 labs and several programs that perform research on a broad range of topics, anywhere ranging from sun's effect on the Earth's atmosphere to the ocean's role in the weather. So all these programs end up generating a lot of data. And for historic reasons, all this data goes into different repositories, the GDEX, the Climate Data Gateway, RDA. You might be familiar with some of these. And some of the data that's in these repositories can be found using our data catalog. And we are currently serving 2 classes of users. Firstly, we have the users who have direct access to NCAR's HPC resources. They have an account and they have POSIX access to all this data. But that's not ideal because the only way they can know how to find a file is to ask a colleague, hey, where is this located on our file system? Secondly, we have to cater to our remote users who still use the legacy download and analyze model. So they want to look at Boulder temperature on 2005, January 1st. They end up downloading, they first have to figure out which data set they want to work on and then choose a file. And this can be a 1 GB file or a 100 GB file, depending on the data set. Download this entire file or maybe hundreds of files based on the workflow, and just to get a small amount of data. So this is not ideal either. And if you're lucky, you go to one of these repositories, which has a smooth experience, and not all of these have the ideal user experience. So the user experience can vary wildly depending on which repository you go to. So we want to obviously solve this problem, and that's where our vision of data commons comes in. We want to have data and compute infrastructure that satisfies these principles. Firstly, we want it to be accessible to all. It should be simple and consistent. Does not matter whether you are an undergrad or an expert user of this data. You should be able to go to this data commons and find your data easily and load it into your workflow. Secondly, we want it to be integrated. So you want to run one of those zillion ML models. You want to compute something interesting or perform data analysis on using this data without having to downloading it into your HPC system or your laptop. You should be able to do that. And finally, we want it to be a community effort. So somebody else should be able to plug into this ecosystem and say, hey, can I share my data? Yes, we should be able to allow for that. In particular, for the 2 classes of users that I mentioned in the previous slide, we don't want remote users to download files anymore. We want them to stream the subsets of data that they need to their workflows directly. And this audience obviously knows what is streaming data access. So I'll not dwell on it. And the POSIX users who have HPC accounts continue to have direct access to this data. That's where our collaboration with the OSDF comes in. And as Brian mentioned, OSDF is a federated platform for delivering data sets from repositories to compute in an effective and scalable fashion. And in practice, it looks like this. There are a bunch of data origins and caches that are scattered across the globe. And if you request data from any repository, let's say that's plugged into the OSDF, then it is requested from the cache that's closest to you. If the cache doesn't have this data, then the data comes from the data origin itself, along the way gets copied to the cache that's closest to you, and then comes to your workflow in your laptop. And in particular, we have, with the help of OSDF, installed an OSDF origin and a cache at NCAR now. So all of our data is available to the OSDF. So if you go to the RDA right now and click on our web file listing for any data set, then you'll see that all the HTTPS links are replaced by an OSDF-powered HTTPS link. And what this means in the backend is that it's aware of the OSDF director, which is the magic that knows which cache to send you to, which origin to send you to fetch the data in the fastest possible way. And here is a quick example of NCAR data flowing through an international cache. So this is a Korea OSDF cache. And I think our top users are from China. So they're probably pulling all this data from Korea. This is fantastic. As I mentioned, the other kind of data access that we want to support is ARCO access or streaming access. And in order to support this, we have created intake and intake ESM catalogs that have these OSDF links. So to put it all together, there is the NCAR data commons. POSIX user or on-prem user would discover data sets using a catalog and follow the orange arrow and stream directly read data into their workflows on NCAR's HPC systems. Whereas a remote user would discover the same data using a different catalog and with the help of OSDF, stream that data into their workflow. And we have published several workflows that leverage this data infrastructure to help researchers understand how this can be done. It's all available at this GitHub repository. In the few minutes I have left, I'll focus on one of these. It's a classic one, global mean surface temperature. And for this, I'll get CMIP temperature data from the AWS Open Data Program, and the observation are from the Hadley Center, but they're hosted on NCAR's RDA. So just super quickly, you have these two blobs of data. One is sitting on AWS, that's the CMIP data, and the other is on NCAR's data commons. A user wants this in their Jupyter Hub, let's say, and they discover these two data sets using intake ESM catalogs. Their OSDF origin sitting next to these data repositories. Yeah. And all the data flows to your laptop from the cache that's closest to you. There you go. The blobs are transferred. So just to show you how it works in practice, so this is the intake ESM catalog. If you look at the ZStore column, you see instead of an HTTPS://link, you have OSDF://link. So just to make it obvious that it's powered by the OSDF. And here's the plot. Shows global mean surface temperature, both during the historical period and during the future period under two different forcing scenarios. And the red dash dotted line is the observations that's coming from NCAR. Yeah, that's all I had. Hopefully this will encourage you to plug into the OSDF data system, or if you're a user, it'll encourage you to use this infrastructure. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah, sure. Next speaker is Joseph Kennedy.
All right, so I'm going to pivot a little bit. It's probably, I guess, first I should say I'm Joseph Kennedy. I'm at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the Geophysical Institute there. And I'm going to start talking about how we might use these resources for actual science, I guess. So I'm going to talk based on the parallel ice sheet model, which is an ice sheet model housed at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It's also co-developed by and student Postdam. What we do with this ice sheet model is quite a variety of things. It's one of the most popular ice sheet models in the community. We know it's being used by 30 institutions across 12 countries, lots of publications, and it's one of the unique things that we do is it's completely openly developed. We don't have any private repositories or branches or anything. Everything we do, you can see. When we've pushed a lot of things forward in the community, including using the NetCDF data model instead of just text files for data and these kind of things. So we're interested in kind of in exploring how we can use this model for these large simulations. So he talked about CMIP6 data, which are these large coupled model intercomparison projects that we do to compare how all of the Earth system models, all the ice sheet models, atmosphere models, there's a bunch of MIPS, work and run, that we have consensus on how these systems work. This is an unfunded community effort. All of this work in that goes into the sea level rise projections that we make for IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, all of the assessment reports. So ESMIP6 was the last one for AR6. For the ice sheet model and a comparison project, there was like 21 groups around the world. There's 37 different models. There's not really 37 models. A lot of the models have the same legacy, but are slightly different. So there's about a dozen ice sheet models really doing this. And the main thing we're trying to do is project how much water that's sitting on the land in these ice sheets ends up in the ocean for sea level rise, right? In the assessment report, the main wild card for sea level projections in the future was ice sheet modeling. There's just not enough understanding. So like our goals for the next assessment report are to lower the uncertainty in these modeling communities. And I'm going to talk kind of how we're going to do that and what resources we would need to do that. Importantly, the main goal of our grant is to increase the diversity, I know that's a bad word right now, of participation in the modeling community. The more research groups and researchers we can get engaged and working from especially a wider degree of institutions around the world, the better we can make these projections, more local knowledge, more understanding of the world. So we'll talk about ice sheet models really quick. The big pile of ice on the land. There's a bunch of stuff we can see at the surface, a lot of surface processes going. These are things we can measure really well. Then there's a lot of the ice sheets interface with the ocean, maybe primarily interface with the ocean. Like the West Antarctic ice sheet is a marine ice sheet, so it's actually sitting on land that's under sea level. So if it melts a lot, it floats and goes away. And then there's the subglacial, the stuff under the ice sheet, and I'm going to focus mostly on that because we can't really observe it. It's really hard to look at the ground under the ice sheet and get information on what's going on under there. So we think about these ice sheet models we need to understand the basal strength, how strong the ice is at that ground interface, what happens there, does it slide, does it yield as it flows, and kind of what the pressures are under there. If you throw up these equations, these are just equations. I wouldn't worry about what's happening here other than showing that there's a bunch of parameters. So in the first one, we need to know the threshold stress of the ice, this exponent that goes into this equation. The yield stress, we've got a bunch of different things that are dependent on the angle of the stress on the bed, the till, how strong the till is on the ground. And I'm just got tired of drawing boxes around parameters because we've got lots of them when we get to the effective pressure. And so there's lots of things that we can't observe that we don't really know a whole lot about happening down there that is just a knob in the model, right, that we have to tune. And then on top of that, the problem is that ice sheet models are expensive. To do a full sea level projection simulation of Greenland, just one simulation run for 100 years, including the hydrology model at like 600 meters resolution, which is very high resolution for an ice sheet model. We need like 480 cores, and that takes like a week of compute time to do that 100-year simulation. And this is just in a standalone configuration. This isn't coupled to our system model. So we're not also running an atmosphere and an ocean and a land and a snow and et cetera model at the same time, like most of these really high fidelity simulations are doing. So how do we explore that large dimensional parameter space for a model that's this expensive? And we're going to really need to lean on both the techniques of high performance computing and high throughput computing to do this, especially for the uncertainty quantification and calibration. So if we think about resource availability in the community, there's lots of resources that are available, especially through really cool tools like OS Pool, but they're not super capable, right? They're your laptop, your server under your desk. They're farming off jobs to a bunch of feeder queues across kind of institutions. These are really like small nodes, like handful of CPUs, tens of gigabytes of memory, right? When we start going up the capacity mountain, which I'm using the Summit supercomputer logo for, which was last year the #9 supercomputer in the world. It was also decommissioned last year, but the logo works for this, so I'm using it still. We can get kind of Amazon EC2 instances. That gets us a little higher. We can even get like supercomputing intended ones. And then we get into our like university clusters, like Chinook in Alaska. That's what the guys are working on. They're looking for bugs in there. And their like AWS parallel cluster lets us set up kind of a pretty okay supercomputer in the cloud. But when we get really to the top 10 supercomputing centers, we need to be computing at the leadership computing facilities. So I'll kind of talk about how we move up this capability mountain. And unfortunately, as you go up the mountain, it's more expensive. That expense might not be passed down to researchers, but somebody's paying for it. And so we have to limit those resources in the community. And then there's a whole bunch of technical barriers to get there, to climb. Like you doing full-on supercomputing simulations on Summit is not easy. It's not fun either often. And so like what we're focused on is how much can we pull all of this research down the mountain, and that's where we can make it more available to the community. So if we're going to go through this really quick, but we need to calibrate the ice sheet model. We can calibrate really well against ice flow. That's what's happening at the surface. We can measure that. We have satellite images back to 1984. We take cross comparisons of those images. We can do pixel offset tracking. We get this like really nice time series from 1984 all the way to now for every glacier in the world at like 10-meter resolution, right? We know what the ice is flowing. We're not so good at mass. Like that's how much water has come out, the change in mass from the ice sheets. We do have the GRACE satellite and similar gravimetric satellites that have been available, but only in the 2000s era. So we really only have like 20 years of observations to calibrate against for a simulation that we need to spin up, because the history of stress and strain and all of this stuff in the ice takes hundreds of years for the ice sheet to normalize to, and then make sure that we hit that 20-year segment window really nicely, and then we want to run it another 100 years from there. So we're basically trying to calibrate a time series to a single point. Super fun. And then we want to, across this like probable set of good parameters that we're going to determine in our calibration, we want to do an ensemble simulation because we know it's not super great, and just kind of see what the ranges of things that we get. And then we aggregate those results into a single projection. And so those like 37 model groups providing the projections, like that's what it is. We've done all of this kind of for all of them, and they're saying this is our best guess 100 years from now what the ice is going to look like. So the technique we're going to take, this was pioneered by Andy Oshwadden and Doug Binkerhoff. It's a statistical Monte Carlo Bayesian approach to this. But we're going to run the ice sheet simulation really at really coarse resolution, like as fine as we can get it on the resources available. So if we're running on OS Pool and the laptops and desktops we can assemble together, we're running at like 2 to 4 kilometer resolution. So, you know, 4 to like 10 times coarser than we'd like to run for the actual projection. So we're going to do a bunch of these simulations. We're going to kind of completely explore the actual parameter space there. We have lots of resources that we can do this on. They're highly available thanks to things like OS Pool, run thousands to millions of simulations here. And we're going to train a surrogate machine learning model on those that connects kind of the parameter space to the observed flow. And then that gives us a probable set of parameters. A lot of those simulations won't even work. We can just throw that parameter combination out nicely when that happens. Use that observed velocity that we have over that kind of observing record, the 40-ish year record we have now, to get a really good sampling of that surrogate model. So we're running now a surrogate model on GPUs, which we can get through OS Pool and things, but we might have to lean on Amazon or the university clusters to really run the surrogate models and sample them. And then we get this kind of equal probability samples. So like there's a bunch of samples here with a bunch of different parameters that are probably equally probable as the good parameter combinations. We refine those by now looking at the mass loss. So we rerun those samples. We augment those samples with parameters that don't affect flow, but might affect mass loss. So we're running now another thousands to millions of simulations using the coarse level and surrogate model, but not quite as coarse as before because now we need to get good at the mass and evaluate the likelihood of that parameter set now, resample with replacement. And at this point, we're pretty confident we've got a good set of parameters since we're climbing this mountain. And so now we can actually effectively make use of this peak of computing resources. So we're still going to do a bunch of 100-year simulations. If we do 500 of them, which we'd like to, we're asking for like 250,000 cores for at least a week, right? So that would be all of Summit for 1 or 2 weeks, the supercomputer. Or the current #2 supercomputer in the world as of last month is Frontier, also at Oak Ridge National Lab, where Summit used to be housed. We're still asking for 40% of the like global peak computing capacity to do this. And remember, this is one simulation from one modeling group, or one projection from one modeling group. So kind of the takeaway from this talk is I think the community resources are essential to democratizing compute research. Like the more we can do good parameter studies and estimations and getting the Earth system models tuned and ready to go for these large compute runs, the more we can bring other people into them. So we can bring other universities, we can bring people that don't have experience and can't get experience in these resources in. They can help us build out these parameter sets. These are lots of jobs, lots of analysis that needs to happen. And like in the global community, most of our most important research tasks, climate change, et cetera, are these most expensive type computing problems. And if we can play with math and this computer statistics, we can get there in a much more equitable sense. But in the end, we're still going to need HPC. We're still going to end up there. And how we get there is, I think, the kind of question that we're trying to resolve. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Joseph. The next speaker is Alexander Holzman from the University of Colorado. He's on Zoom.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second. Oh, you need to allow me to share my screen, Harsha. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Hölzmann. And together with my colleagues, Carrie Bell, Christine Liu, and Rudy Kluczyk, I'm working on our project called Sonar AI, where we are using self-supervised learning and a human in the loop to analyze more than 20 years of sonar acoustic data. I would like to start this presentation by explaining what is sonar data, what is our motivation. Then I will go over to some objectives that we have. We will talk about a couple of details of the project. And then I'm going to present some preliminary results that we have. All right, what is sonar data? Sonar data are basically sound waves that are transmitted into the water column and are then being reflected by objects in the water. This can be, for example, fish schools, as you can see here on the right side, or, for example, plankton, or whatever object is in the water. The signal is then being measured again on the ship or on the sender. And by this measurement, we can see how deep the object is, but also the volume of the object, for example. The sonar data can be used to conserve and to manage marine ecosystems, but it also helps us to assess the biomass of fishes. And in the long run, it also helps, for example, the fishery industry. We have more than 320 terabytes of data, or basically more than 20 years of water column sonar data that we are going to process and analyze. We have three primary objects, which are to fuse these multiple decades of water, which is a task on itself, since the data set is so big. We are going to develop a self-supervised machine learning model in order to be able to analyze this huge amount of data. And we would like to share and engage with the community using open source tools. This is the whole project workflow, but I will reduce it a little bit and now jump into the details. Here on top, you can see our data set. It is currently saved in AWS or in several AWS buckets. We have our level 0 data, which is basically the raw data as it comes from the data recording. We have our level 1 data, which is the raw files, which is a proprietary format, but transferred into an open source format called ZAR. And we have our level 2 data, which are these ZAR files, but they are pre-processed now in order to be able to use it for machine learning or also for visualization. Here on the left side, we have our web platform called echo.fish. You can visit that website and you can take a look at how sonar data can be visualized, how it looks like. And here you can see our machine learning workflow. So as I said, we are using self-supervised learning, and self-supervised learning consists of an unsupervised part and a supervised part. Currently, we are in development of the unsupervised part of an autoencoder. This autoencoder has the job to deconstruct our signal and then trying to reconstruct it in order to be able to detect anomalies. The idea behind is that we have such a huge amount of background data, of noisy data, so our autoencoder will be able to reconstruct this noisy background data, but it will suffer when it comes to reconstructing the interesting parts like biological agglomerations, like fishes, for example, because there are only a few examples. And in self-supervised learning, as I said, we have a supervised and an unsupervised part. So in the supervised part, which is going to be developed in the future, we are transferring our pre-trained weights, and then hopefully, because we have sparsely annotated data, we can use these few annotations that we have to train a classification network, since we already have pre-trained weights. At the end, we would like to share all the information that we gather through a knowledge graph, so to make it available for other researchers. This is the architecture of the autoencoder that I'm currently using. It's a very basic autoencoder, nothing fancy, I would say. We have an input layer, we have a convolutional layer, we have a batch norm layer. Then we are sampling down using max pooling, again, a convolutional match and a batch norm layer. Then comes the bottleneck layer, and then we are upsampling again until the data has the same dimensions as the input data. All right, let's take a look on our preliminary results. Here in the top row, you can see our input signal. You can see there's a lot of background data, this dark blue parts, and you can see that there are some interesting regions here, which are a little bit brighter. And on top of this, you can see some red drawings, red polygons, which are the annotations that we have that are provided by our domain experts. So we are giving this data into our network. We are trying to reconstruct it. And then I'm calculating an error map. And this error map now highlights where the autoencoder has troubles to reconstruct the signal. And these areas kind of match with the annotations that we have, which also confirms for us that we are here on the right way, the right route. Here in the lower part, you can see my first attempt of clustering the data. You can see that we have a huge background cluster, the white part here, which is has been put in one cluster, and then the biological agglomerations that are marked red in the anomaly detection is being separated into two clusters, a dark red one and a white cluster. All right, how are we using the OS pool? Right now, we are using the OS pool for 3 tasks. First, we are processing our batch processing our raw data to level 1 data and to level 2 data. I'm using the OS pool for large-scale anomaly detection. So next week, I'm going to start to process whole cruises. And for this, especially, the OS pool will be very useful because the cruise that I'm going to work on, the cruise itself has 180 gigabytes of data. So the OS pool will be very useful to split this into several tasks and let it processed in parallel. Also, I'm using it for hyperparameter tuning of neural networks. Future work is to further refine the unsupervised anomaly detection. Then second, as I said, to process one specific cruise, the 2019 cruise that we have. Because this cruise is the one that we have the most annotations for, and therefore it will be very useful to process this cruise because we can evaluate against the annotations that we have. Then the third point is to develop the supervised fish classifier and to share our insights with the community by developing the knowledge graph and visualizations. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, my name is Claire Sturm, and I'm with the Societal Computing Innovation Lab at UC San Diego. I'm going to be talking through the National Data Platform. I want to say that we've heard some great talks this morning that really highlight the expertise and workflows within this community. And with solutions and opportunities like OS Pool and Pelican, we can really think about how can we enable more of our existing support through cyber infrastructure to make these data challenges more effective. What we look at for the National Data Platform also is how can we tie together all of these different workflows in a seamless way to really empower our students, empower our educators, and help them also utilize these workflows. So with the National Data Platform, we're seeing this as a broad, federated, and extensible data ecosystem. What I mean by that is we're focusing on data-enabled spaces and AI integration. I know that's been our favorite term that we've heard throughout several sessions. When we think about the space of NDP, it's really a centralized catalog, workflows, and community altogether. We're enhancing the aspect of connecting to distributed endpoints and really cultivating those resources for our classroom education data challenges. And what I mean by a data challenge is often we'll have educators or even just ourselves as researchers. We have this really complex challenge that we're thinking through, and how can we enable a little bit of citizen science or even students to help think through this challenge in a different, unique way. So inviting them in with cyber infrastructure so they have easy access to workflows. And they can also go through the steps of looking at the data, looking at the models, and tying it all together. And we have a wide variety of applications using AI and data within NDP today. And these data points are coming from our existing spaces of repository and SF facilities. We've got the NAIR, which is National AI Research Resource, and it's in its pilot phase. NASA, USGS, NOAA, and USDA, all of our friends. So thinking about it as a centralized space, we are connecting in these distributed solutions all together in a web-based access portal. So a nice connection in with the National Data Platform as both a hub, but also as a federation. So wouldn't be a cyber infrastructure talk without looking at architecture. So here is the architecture pitch. We see NDP with this portal interfacing through the web. It enables you to do search, discovery, access to data, and also thinking about those workflow use cases, that education hub for our classrooms coming together. And it's all with a cross-cutting service with authorization using Keycloak. That enables you to sign in with your CI logon or institutional identity, could also be your ORC ID. The other factors there too is we're looking at cataloging our data. This is more from a metadata standpoint. We're not actually hosting the data. We're just describing it to the community for discovery. And then we're using solutions within our APIs and those endpoints to enable you to connect to the data directly through a workflow. And on our left side, we see the data sets that we're actively working with, Earth, Scope, Wi-Fi, and the NAIR data sets, for example, and external resources as well, like GitHub, so you can pull in your scripts. So I've highlighted a few capabilities, but let's dig a little deeper. Again, with the classroom, researcher, and data challenge perspective, we're coming in to access a workspace. And in this workspace, we're connecting in data, models, and services. That the data, again, is identified through the metadata and the catalog, and then it dips into our compute resources that are available to us. When we think about the data ingest process, it's an invitation to those that are working with data or even repository leads to describe what data you are currently looking at, managing, and collecting some core information. We then can utilize the core information to build in that data stream that connects into a Jupyter Notebook through the National Data Platform's portal. And why it's important for us to learn about what data you have through the metadata ingest is to really enable better discovery. So we have a wide variety of sciences and solutions that are using NDP today. So it's really important for us to identify the unique characters that are informative about your science. So those that are looking for your solution can have better understanding from it from a text search. We look at map-based search. So where is the data actually collected from, and being able to do some other contextual searches as well in the future. When you're working with NDP, it's really an invitation as well to invite your team in. We set these up as a space for your project to really come in, identify all of the group members so they can have access to the workflows as well. You can think about it from an education space. I, as a professor, am setting up these Jupyter notebooks. I want to enable my students to be able to utilize these workflows that I've set up in a notebook. And so I'm going to invite my classroom in, or at least my graduate students, to help me process and analyze the data within these solutions. We also see that with NAIR data sets and AI workflows, this enables a better process of visibility of what we can actually continue analyzing and connecting in with solutions like NDP and OSDF storage backends. And we're also making the workflows for education research more of a compatible space through NRP, the National Research Platform, and AWS. So it's not a talk also without use cases. So who have we worked with recently? I'm going to just kind of get into a little bit more of like the space that you see for adding in your data sets and scripts. This is important for us in a UI workflow because it interconnects back in. And it also connects in with that national research platform to select what compute is available within the US. So you can actually say, I need compute from UCSD or just anywhere in the general West, for example. And it also enables with OSDF to also connect in the actual cache that you have as a space of data that I want to pull in. You're going to enter in your credentials that you have with Pelican. And from that space as well, you can say, I've completed my analysis. I have my results back from my compute, and I want to actually send it back to Pelican to be able to create a persistent link that others can look at my analysis and say, was it useful? Am I wrong? Can you try it yourself? So, how does this work? An example here is with EarthScope. We have our live streamed sensor data coming in. We're able to utilize NDP endpoints to really connect in the streaming through AWS, and we're registering the data itself into that metadata catalog. We're then able to send the historical data storage over to OSDF and Pelicans as origins, and that enables us to take this endpoint, build it into the catalog, and focus it in for future AI workflows using OSGS or OSG and OSDF. Another example, which you all maybe heard a little bit about during the earlier sessions, we're working on a wildfire science and technology commons. And this is a space too where we have similar cataloging, and the unique aspect here is a partnership where we tie in all of our metadata in the wildfire science and technology commons. It flows directly upstream into NDP2. So if you're actually building into wildfire research, you can discover it for others through NDP as a solution. So we see this as an endpoint in our core NDP services here, and we can actually contribute data as well using Pelican to have that in our metadata selection and how to get that as an access point. So a lot of words, but I would encourage you to look at it yourself. So how can we get started? You can access the National Data Platform today. Again, that registration is simplified through being able to take it as your own institutional identification that you have. You don't have to remember one more password. You can also connect with OrgID. And we have documentation that's available as a core port of what questions you have for us and how can we answer them from historical knowledge. And additionally, it's always great to have your hands on something. So we have a onboarding challenge that you can dive right in and have some existing Jupyter notebooks that are set up and have the data packages already connected. So you can go through the process of what is the experience of analysis through NDP using the onboarding challenge. So definitely invite you in to connect with that and see how you can use it yourself for your research and workflows. With that, I will say thank you for your time and happy to open it up for the discussion.
Thanks, Claire.
Actually, I have another slide deck in the directory. So yeah, at this point, if anybody has any questions, we're happy to take them. Let me just see here. Let's can we reload this, Harsha, somewhere? Yep. And we have discussion opportunities, but we really want to hear from you. You know, we appreciate you being here for this session. We know it's late in the workshop, but I just wanted to put back up all of the speakers. So if you have specific questions, just a reminder of who talked just now. So first of all, do we have any questions for the speakers, either online or in the audience? Yep.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I needed the microphone or not. I am Anna Krelling. I'm from NCI, so I am not a researcher. And I was just wondering, so this would be a question, I guess, mostly for Claire, if this platform would be available for someone like me. So I'm technically employed by the University of Maryland because I'm in a cooperative institute working for NCI. So would that platform be available for someone like me that's not exactly a researcher, but is interested in what tools are available for researchers and facilitating classes and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we see a lot of different use cases too with our partners that are helping researchers, right? So having a good understanding of what solutions are available, this is perfect, right? We want you to know about these solutions so then you can communicate to a researcher who's trying to maybe stand up their own Jupyter hub, their own data pipelines. Hey, we have something that you can actually access today, and it just takes that authentication. And definitely through that CI logon, you can just search for your institution and access through your credentials and explore things like the onboarding that we have, or also try your own workflow if you do have some, data from a researcher that you want to start analyzing.
And I know it's not exactly what you asked, but from the OSDF and OSPool services as well, we try to draw as wide a circle around, who we can let in, right? We can't let in Bitcoin mining, these sorts of things, but it is actually hard to come up with a legal definition of, who are the good people helping to advance science. But I think actually my favorite set of folks that we've had come run on was actually a high school teacher teaching classes and wanted to do something advanced and something different for his students. So while we say, simply, US-based researchers, we try to carve it as widely as we can without getting into trouble.
Thanks. Really great session and great presentations, everyone. I really appreciated the theme of democratizing access to compute resources, whether it be overcoming barriers to adoption or to access to compute or storage. The high-end HPC is the place where I start to have questions about how to effectively democratize that access because you, as Joseph pointed out, it is a difficult thing to do, high-end HPC. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on how to lower the barriers both to the technical adoption of those assets, but also the allocations and the steps you have to jump through in order to get time on some of the bigger clusters around the country.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. This part of our project is actually just one part addressing kind of that whole question. The idea for us is that there's a lot of like specialized like skills you sort of need. So how do we move that into just a normal space? So taking these big ice sheet models, figuring out how to distribute them with SPAC, Conda, in a Singularity and Docker container so that we can get users kind of directly to the model faster without having to compile on these systems. Initially, at least, we've also developed a cloud-based, or we're developing a cloud-based interface effectively, where you can say, I want to run this model with these parameters, and we'll handle, here's all the input data, here's all the gridding, set that all up, stage it on the compute infrastructure and run it, whether it's Pool or in Amazon. And then just in the end, your data ends up in an S3 bucket that you can access. And so we can completely abstract the actual like running, and then you can focus really on this is the input data and the parameters I want to mess with, to kind of ease people in that thing. But in the end, like the balance between making things easy and teaching people is really hard. And so we need to make sure we're also teaching people to move up the mountain, as you say.
So one comment on that, since that happens to be one of my hobby horses, is get rid of more of the computer scientists. HPC has tended to be a gatekeeping community. You should use my resource effectively, and I'm going to define what it means effectively, and then maybe I'll let you in. One of my early career experiences was a sysadmin who said, you can't do your science on this machine because your science doesn't need enough MPI. And you're ruining my machine because you're not using MPI. So go make your science look like this. So there's the good apples and bad apples, but as a community, we tend to focus on things like efficiency, effectiveness, keeping out the hordes, and I think we have done a very poor job of saying, what can we do to be most effective science? What can we do that does the best science? And I find that computer scientists get so excited, as a computer scientist, get so excited about things like efficiency that we lose sight of why these resources are there in the first place. But again, favorite hobby horse of mine.
Chris Lenhart at NCAR. Great session. Love seeing how all these big pieces are trying to be put together. And I think my question picks up on sort of this democratizing theme, but and I hope it's not an unfair question because it's more looking future as opposed to what you've been putting together. But I'm curious, picking on AI again, to what extent you all are thinking about incorporating AI, not for a science workflow per se, but to facilitate search and retrieval or data fusion or building your metadata or whatever. There's lots of other ways that these things can be incorporated. Thanks.
Anybody want to take that? I think it sounds sort of like a national data platform.
Hot mic. All right. So this is also a goal of ours with our search. That's why we say and more. We're really looking at what can we collect in an effective way and then utilize even how people are searching to better train the results of I'm curious about this thing. And it also collides with a similar type of work that another person has added to the catalog. So if you're looking about hydrology, we're talking about ice sheets, right? Thinking about what are the other data points that might be impactful for a modeler who's looking at ice sheets and saying, oh, we also recommend that you look at these as well. So having better recommenders, having better results when you're searching versus trying to find all the happy words that can actually send the real thing, like I need to find NCAR's data. So yes, we're definitely working on that alignment and any recommendations too of like what would you like that experience to be. We're very open to having that feedback.
I always tell folks you can tell when you're talking to an AI researcher by asking them, what do you do once the model's trained? And if the answer is, I publish the paper and start something else, then they're AI researcher. Versus if you're talking to the scientist, they say, it's nice it got trained, but then I do the real stuff. And unfortunately, when we talk about AI, we get excited about NVIDIA GPUs and the stock price of NVIDIA and the big clusters. And not enough people ask that question. There's not enough people saying, now we have it. How do we use it? How do we make it? How do we use it for science? How do we make it productive for people? And I know we didn't have a speaker for here, but that's actually one of the really cool things that NRP is doing. It makes a couple or 1,500 GPUs available for deploying services. You can do it kind of at the very high level, like NDP does, which requires less kind of cyber infrastructure chops, or you can go all the way to the low level and deploy raw models and set up as part of your ecosystem. And it's a really fun project. It's really a great set of folks to work with. And I really like it because they start asking, how do we use this question as opposed to, we trained the model, let's go submit the NERPS paper.
And NRP is National Research Platform, for those who aren't familiar with it.
I can kind of answer maybe as a researcher, thinking about how someone might use our model. So my experience using like LLMs and AI and ChatGPT and whatnot has been mixed in that it's actually really, really helpful for something like Xarray, which is a really popular open source. Everything's in the open, gets talked about a lot. So there's a lot of things for the AI to read, right? And it's also not maybe documented the best. So it like the LLM is really good at catching on things that like it sees in code happen as well, right? Like because the code's all open in these communities. And so we've actually had really good experience figuring out how to do things that are undocumented with Xarray, using it, which is really cool. And so like I think my message is like if we want the community to be able to take advantage of things like ChatGPT, it's doing the unfun work, which is do really good documentation, make your code open, right? Like it's all the things like the code gets read the most. Like it's not the performance, it's not running, it's actually getting read, and that's what the LLM's doing. It's reading. On the flip side, leaning on it too much, my experience has been leading a team of software engineers is that what happens is the LLM ends up putting the cognitive work on me as the PR reviewer, not as the developer. So it's kind of like you have to actually still consciously pay attention and work through the problems yourself, but it can be a really helpful tool, especially for these codes and getting more of these obscure science stuff out in the open, documented well, following these best practices is actually what's going to make these LLMs helpful in that space. Yeah. Yeah. Which is nobody wants to do. Yeah, an LLM can help there for sure. Yes. With making your documentation. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
So I want to ask something sort of different. I'm at NCAR and I'm a data provider. We collect observations. And so my question is for Doug and Hersha. So I keep seeing words Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Hub bandied about. And I'm wondering with the data commons that you envision building, if you plan to support Jupyter Hub. And the reason why I'm asking is, we collect all these data sets and then we process them and then we archive them and then we walk away and we go to our next field campaign. And one of the things that I think is a great difficulty is if people discover our data, then what do they do with it? And I'd really like to develop Jupyter notebooks as like Jupyter Notebook 101 on here's a modular wind profiler in a netcdf or as our format, and here's how you can crack it open, and here are some of the things that you can do with it. And the hope is that they can just take at least the reader and some of the visualization parts of it and then build on what they want to do with it for their research. And while it's nice that I can make a Jupyter notebook and spit out an IPINB, X and put it on our webpage, what I'd really like to do is like integrate it into a data commons, which I think will be more impactful because then they can use it to search for other things other than just like that one data set example that I have. And so that would be my question for you guys is if you plan to have a Jupyter Hub type thing where I could have a training module as a Jupyter notebook and give it to you to integrate.
So I'll answer part of that and then I'll let Harsha speak on something, but I think like what NDP does is they have data set landing pages and you can click on a link basically to open a notebook that runs on a Jupyter Hub that you have to authenticate to. So like you land on a data set landing page and then you can basically execute an example notebook that describes how to access that. That's one use case. So NCAR actually has a Jupyter Hub already on the Casper system, but you need an account. You need to be a user of that system to run on that. So we want to open that up to a broader community, basically. So it exists already, but we'd like to make it easier to use and have examples that are tied to data sets where I can push a button and it spawns that example and runs on it. And you'll have to have some kind of access privileges to, be a part of that community like you do with NDP. Yeah, that's the vision. And then for some of the use cases you were talking about, I think the Pythia cookbooks would be great.
Right. So to answer the part 2 of your question, basically we are developing a collection of examples for each data set that NCAR hosts. And there are Jupyter books, which are more than Jupyter notebooks, basically a description of the data set, a sort of hand-holding tutorial for how to deal with the data set, what are the packages that are necessary, and how to visualize something interesting with the data set. And these are archived as Pythia notebooks. There's an organization called Project Pythia. You should check it out. And they're having a hackathon in 2 weeks. So you're all welcome to attend. Yeah.
For our observation.
Right. I think that.
Yeah.
No, that'd be great. And I think like if somebody from you all could participate with the hackathon. But
Oh, that's great.
The other technology that's getting pretty cool, so you have Jupyter hubs and there's now various resources around the nation to spawn one up specific to a data set. Then you can have all your users go there and try things out. But even then, sometimes having an institutional log on might be hard if you're a teacher or students. So a cool technology is coming up is Jupyter Lite, which does that all within the browser, that there's no backend server or anything like that. And it executes all within your laptop. So this has been, if you looked at it about 18 months ago, maybe like half the Python packages you wanted worked with it. Now, it's like 3/4 or maybe 70 or 80% work with it. So it's still kind of hit and miss, but it's on a good trajectory. So one of the things that we're working on in our software project is to make sure all of our Python integrations work with Jupyter so that way you could take one of Harsha's notebooks, for example, and execute it just within your browser, and you don't need any backend infrastructure or identity management or accounts or anything like that. In terms of democratizing access, the kind of the flip side of that is you need a laptop. And I know occasionally we'll talk at people at like TCUs or, people who are living in communities without really great internet connectivity. And that can also be a limiter. So I think in some of these, it becomes a all of the above type situation. Try, including things like NDP, but also include things just, like Jupyter Lite, where it can be all laptop based.
I'll go to the back. Well,
And then we got about 5 minutes left. Thanks for the great discussion. It makes it easy for the facilitator.
Hey there, I have a quick question. Up until very recently, I work on a NASA Open Science grant through TOPS, and we have a curriculum that's based on NOAA, NCI, and NASA Earth data. We keep it asynchronous on GitLab pages. It's pretty long, but we run a lot of we did run a lot of workshops, either for like capstone classes that we've hooked up with or live piggybacking on conferences. But we use Quarto. So I was just wondering if there's any Quarto support, because we have asynchronous content, but we kind of will customize some of it so we can get through it in a workshop. And sometimes it's Python, sometimes it's R, and it's almost always talking to Earth Data Cloud or AWS's NOAA resources and NCI stuff. So I didn't know if we've been using 2i2c because they can pull in a Docker container I have set up, and then it will launch either Jupyter Hub or RStudio. But I didn't know if any of your guys' cloud platforms would work in any of those like workshop settings or a capstone setting where we could just have people get into a browser, load into our image or whatever system you guys have set up, and allow us to work through. Obviously, with Quarto, we can convert it to a Jupyter notebook if it's Python based. I didn't know if any of your guys' platforms would be appropriate for those types of situations.
Absolutely. So I think the education hub was a bit that I spoke to, and this would be the example here, right? You have facilitated workshops that you're looking to run. You as an instructor would come into NDP, establish, right now we're working with Jupyter Notebooks, but we are looking at RStudio as an extension to deploy soon. And what we would expect then is a bit of a conversation up front so we can help advise on the structure of setup, but we like to see like a good onboarding session, and then we kind of talk about it internally as sprints. So we're encouraging, the students, participants to go through sprint 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's all stacked Jupyter notebooks that have been developed by you and your team that are living there, that they all can just go in and launch. And through our partners like the National Research Platform, they can grab some compute, be able to exercise, and then if they have outputs, right, that are actually really useful, impactful, like what we've talked about with our data challenges for societal, big questions, this is where we can go back to Pelican and say we want to store all of these results into persistent links, and that can be accessed for future work too.
I'll be the runner. Yeah.
Outputs are nice because lots of times, especially when we're working on capstones, I always try to develop the content so that it's kind of like location of interest flexible. You can change the coordinates or the shapefile and make it more personable. But that was a limitation in some of our previous setups that, the kids or the attendees can't kind of change the location and rerun the notebook and then like save the output or something, so cool. That's nice and flexible.
All right. Did you have a comment, Joseph, or? Okay, good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We did have some questions up there for you. If you're interested, you can just add your comments directly to the notes document for the session. You know, do you know of similar technologies or employer know of similar technologies, so OSDF or OS Pool, you know, the things described today? I think there are a lot of these things out there. People just aren't aware of them. So, and then are there use cases that you could leverage that you'd like to work with us on? And then, you know, finally, do you have ideas on where we go next? Who should we collaborate with? Would you like to contribute? So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today.